Hello, welcome to an adventure. I am Anthony Wright de Hernandez, Community Collections Archivist here at Virginia Tech, also known on the Twitcherverse as Rogan27. And this is Archival Adventures, the once-a-week show where I share things from special collections and university archives here at Virginia Tech. If you're new here, welcome. This show is going out on two channels. The University Libraries channel, which is twitch.tv/VTUL Studios, as well as my own personal channel, which is twitch.tv/Rogan27. Welcome. It is great to have you here. I hope that you all are having a great week. It's hard for me to believe that it's Wednesday already, but it is. Let me see who else popped up in chat. Hannah, welcome. It is good to see you. Hi, Lord Portico. Thank you for giving the shout out over to VTUL Studios. Indeed. I am the primary person who ends up streaming over there, but occasionally, especially during the academic year, others will stream on our channel. So if you drop a follow over there, you'll always know if something's happening. I know there's been like 3D design and music writing and some board game stuff, as well as we did a Mario Kart tournament once. It's fun times. You should follow. Hi, Key Squared. It is good to see everybody. How are you? How is your week going? I hope that you're having a good time. Have you learned anything new since last we met? What did we talk about last week? The history has already left my brain. What was last week? I remember 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago was Newman Library. Where did last week go in my head? What do you mean, question mark? I tried to open a spreadsheet. My computer says, what spreadsheet? It's fine. I was just going to double check and see, because my brain has forgotten last Wednesday. So I was going to look it up and see what it was. Last one you remember is the library stuff. Well, and half of last week was library stuff. Because I fixed some stuff from the week before, and we talked about that. Oh yes, it was the crossed letters and the Pittman shorthand last week. Wow, that just completely left my brain. Yeah, we looked at the Civil War era crossed letters and the very unique Pittman shorthand that we were not able to read. But it was really kind of interesting. I enjoy that sort of thing. Oh, that makes sense, Hannah. Anyway, we should dive in to today, which I'll get to what we're talking about today in just a moment. I mean, you probably have seen it in the announcement or in the stream title. But today is the week set aside for something from the Heron speculative fiction collection. And so, indeed, that's what we will be doing, is something from the Heron speculative fiction collection. Next week, on Wednesday, we will return to the USS Dakota Engineers Journal, picking up, I just called it On the James River because I've skimmed to see sort of what was happening in the journal, and it's just up and down the James River, so that should be interesting. And then on the 12th of June, it's the first one that I've approached as true crime. I have a true crime episode about the 1917 trial of Charles Vodder Jr. And then on the 19th, we will be dark because the university will be closed for Juneteenth. So that's what's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Before we dive in on today's topic, since this is a history-focused stream, and I'm at an institution in the United States of America, it's important that we acknowledge the history of the institution. Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo and Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tutelo and Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous student, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. Virginia Tech acknowledges that its Blacksburg campus sits partly on land that was previously the site of the Smithfield and Solitude plantations, owned by members of the Preston family. Between the 1770s and the 1860s, the Prestons and other local white families that owned parcels of what became Virginia Tech also owned hundreds of enslaved people. We acknowledge that enslaved Black people generated wealth that financed the predecessor institution to Virginia Tech, the Preston and Nolan Institute, and they also worked on construction of its building. Not until 1953, however, was the first Black student permitted to enroll. Through inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to prosim that I may serve. In the spirit of community diversity and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. I did, Hannah, and I just can't decide. Because, like, the long one is accurate. But yes, there is a shorter version I could potentially do. I also noticed they made a change in here that I don't have reflected yet. What? This might update just to the shorter one, just for the sake of time, because we only have 2 hours, and reading through the entire thing does take a minute. I know that I used to stumble reading it because there's one bit that just the phrasing is weird to me. There. This whole part in the labor recognition about owned hundreds of enslaved people, I'm not sure I would have gone with that phrasing myself. I probably would have said enslaved hundreds of people. But because you can't own people. That's the whole problem. So I've always struggled with that phrasing, but this is the official statement from the university and how it is worded. I just wish it was slightly different. Anywho, that's not what we're talking about today. What we are talking about today is some speculative fiction stuff. And most of what we're going to look at is in the pages of Thrust magazine. This is not a pornographic magazine, despite the name. I'm just going to nip that in the bud right there. So the topic for today came about because I was like, oh, I need to pick something. It's between the end of term and the beginning of summer, and my student assistant, Sterling, who is now graduated, wasn't around to assist in picking stuff for the week. So I had a week that I needed to pick myself, which is fine. I used to do that all the time. And I was like, I have never looked to see if one of my favorite science fiction authors is represented in our collection. So I went looking for Charles Sheffield, who has written some of my favorite science fiction books. And instead of finding a story by Charles Sheffield to share, which we do have some, I ran across a back and forth debate between Charles Sheffield and Harlan Ellison regarding whether Ellison is a science fiction author. Harlan Ellison took the position that he is not a science fiction author, and Charles Sheffield took the position that he is. So it seemed kind of fun, an interesting topic, and that's what we're going to look at today is this debate. First off, most of what we're going to look at is in Thrust. Hannah, I agree. Thrust is a questionable choice for the name of a non-pornographic magazine. Hi, Pretty Witchery. Thrust was a U.S. semi-prozine, originally a fanzine. And it's sort of unique among the pulps because it ended up doing sort of commentary on the industry of science fiction rather than publishing works of science fiction. So originally it was the magazine of the University of Maryland Science Fiction Society, and then later became its own publication. Let's see. Yes. So in the spring 1976, under the solo editorship of Douglas Fratz, stopped publishing fiction and established the blend of interviews, articles, and reviews, emphasizing controversy and argument, which continued until the final issue in 1993. In 1990, Thrust changed its name to Quantum, Science Fiction and Fantasy Review, which better represented what the magazine was actually about. And you can see here writers that have been associated with the magazine: Paul Anderson, Gregory Benfield, David Bischoff, Michael Bishop, George Alec Effinger, David Langford, Charles Platt, Kim Stanley Robinson, Jessica Amanda Salmonson, Daryl Schweitzer, Charles Sheffield, John Shirley, and Ted White. So that is just a little bit about the magazine that we're going to see most of today. The first letter is actually in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which if you want to know about that, I can pull up that article, but it's a fairly well-known one. So just a quick look at the two authors whose debate we'll be looking at. Charles Sheffield, who, as I said, is wrote some of my favorite science fiction. I was going to say is one of my favorite science fiction authors, and I don't know that that's accurate because I don't know much about him. He wrote some of my favorite science fiction. Born in 1935, died in 2002, a UK-born physicist and author, moved to the United States in 1971, married to Nancy Kress from 98 until his death, published the first of more than 100 technical papers and science articles in 62, the first of 100 or more science fiction stories, What Song the Sirens Sang in Galaxy in 77, Georgia on My Mind and Other Places, collected 1995, the title story of which won the 93 Nebula and the 94 Hugo Awards for Best Novelette. Here's what I want to highlight about him. Let's see. Sheffield's reputation for briskly argued, cleverly plotted, sanguine, hard science fiction. So I know we've talked about it before, but I'll just briefly mention hard science fiction is a term sometimes overlapped in meaning with hardcore science fiction, often used in the 60s and 70s to mean the kind of science fiction that repeats the themes and, to a degree, the style of the genre science fiction written during the so-called golden age of science fiction. It tends to be more rooted in actual scientific theory and less fantastical. So it'll involve more travel through space using methodologies that we're already aware work, rather than theoretical or fictional methodologies such as warp drive in Star Trek, which is a much more fantastical element. Also, congratulations, Pretty Witchery. You've been randomly selected as VIP for the stream. Enjoy the diamond. I'm reminded of an old aeronautical education text I came across once that personified all of the various forces involved in flight. Some friends and I ended up doing a dramatic reading of the lift is lifting and the thrust is thrusting. So many giggles. Oh, Key Squared, I can imagine that would indeed awaken the middle schooler in everyone watching. So Sheffield's novels tended to be more hard science fiction, things like space elevators, etc. He has I want to see there. I know there's a mention in here somewhere of the Heritage Universe. Young adult sequence. I honestly have never thought of the Heritage Universe as being YA, but sure. Summertide, Divergence, Transcendence, and Transvergence. Which a couple of those are combinations of others. Anyway, those are some of my favorites. The first book of his that I ever read was Cold as Ice, which actually led to a trilogy, Cold as Ice, The Ganymede Club, and Darkest Day, and I loved them. So, hi, Puddleglum. Anyway, I wanted to see what we had of Sheffield's because I wanted to share Sheffield, because I feel like not a lot of people today really talk about his work. But then I came across the debate he had with Harlan Ellison regarding what is science fiction. Rustam Bhattacharya in the Cold as Ice books was always a favorite of yours. Yes, Key Squared. That is an excellent character. I love Cold as Ice. It's probably one of my favorite just novels to sit and read. I just love all of it. I would love to see it adapted into like TTRPGs and TV shows. But what's funny is the Heritage Universe and the Cold as Ice stuff, they're not even represented in like a fan wiki anywhere, like where you can go and just look up elements of the world. I have considered potentially doing that myself someday, because I love them both. Anyway, Harlan Ellison, the person who Sheffield ends up debating about, what is science fiction, was born in 1934, died in 2018, U.S. author, the most controversial and among the finest of those writers associated with science fiction whose careers began in the 1950s. That's a very assertive statement that does not appear to have any sort of reference. I'm curious about their source for that statement. This is an encyclopedia. Hopefully, I don't know, that seems subjective. Sometimes the things in the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction come across as pretty subjective. For many years, he insisted that he was not, in fact, primarily a science fiction writer, and indeed, most of his large oeuvre is better described as non-fantastic or fantasy or horror, but his influence on the field, or more accurately perhaps his example, as he became famous through writing little but short stories and much non-fiction, was enormous. And so that sentence right there, for many years he insisted that he was not, in fact, primarily a science fiction writer. That is the crux of the argument that we will be looking at between Harlan Ellison and Charles Sheffield. Because they debated whether or not he was a science fiction author by exchanging letters in Thrust magazine. So Ellison, I want to see if I can find, like, I don't know as much about Harlan Ellison, honestly. I'm looking for what titles of his he's known for. Does anybody know, like, I'm skimming right now. Ellison is one of the relatively few writers of his generation to deal constantly and impassionedly with the turbulent complexities of the modern American city, an engagement that would only significantly be furthered in the genre decades later by the cyberpunk movement. Man with Nine Lives, A Touch of Infinity, Earthman Go Home. He was a successful television writer. Oh, of course. He very famously wrote the original script for The City on the Edge of Forever, the Star Trek episode involving the Guardian of Forever. And it won the Hugo for Best Dramatic Presentation in 1967 and a Writers Guild of America Award for Most Outstanding Script Dramatic Episode of 67-68. It was put into book form twice as The City on the Edge of Forever, 1977, a Star Trek photo novel, and publishing the original script as The City on the Edge of Forever in 1995. Its depiction of an alternate world where Hitler has won, and Kirk and Spock's use of time travel to cancel this alternative makes it perhaps the most memorable of all Star Trek episodes. However, Ellison did not want to be associated with it because Ellison was not happy with the changes that were made to the episode when it was actually produced. So there's more controversy. He was very argumentative and very controversial. Doing your best to follow subtitles because the audio on the computer is trash. Understandable, Sterling. I'm sorry. I don't know a lot of his other stuff. I think I've heard of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. There's mentions here of Asimov and Crichton. Let's see. He served as a creative consultant for the first season of the revived The Twilight Zone. Anyway, you are probably familiar with some of his works. He got the Hugo and Nebula for Repent Harlequin. For Repent Harlequin, said the TikTok man. I'm not familiar with that, but I'm very curious about the title. 68 Hugo for I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I may have read that one on stream. I don't remember. It's a short story in the March 67 issue of If. And I know we looked at If at one point. So there's a chance that's why I know it. A Hugo for The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World. A Hugo for The Death Bird. And a Nebula for A Boy and His Dog. Hugo for Adrift Just Off the Islets of Langerhans, latitude 38 degrees 54 minutes north, longitude 77 degrees 0 minutes 13 seconds west. That is a very long title. Anyway, so well-known author. Ooh, thank you, Key Squared. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is really good and really creepy. Read with care. Yeah, I'm gonna have to double check because I don't remember for sure. I know we looked at If magazine at some point, but I don't remember if we read that or if I just noticed it. So I'm not 100% certain if I've ever actually read it. I'm familiar with the title though. Anywho, let's look at the actual assertion by Harlan Ellison and then the response from Charles Sheffield. I'm going to pop us to the document view where I have the, let's see, this is July of 77, I think. Yes, July 1977, the Harlan Ellison issue of Fantasy and Science Fiction. The magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Also known as F and SF. And here you see an illustration of Ellison apparently being overrun by elves. I don't know. But apparently this issue they had 3 news stories plus an article by Harlan Ellison. More illustrations of him. Anyway, we're going to look at this article, You Don't Know Me, I Don't Know You, which is the impetus. This is the start of the argument. I'm going to try not to destroy the spine of this as best I can. You don't know me. I don't know you. Let's see how this works. Copyright 1977 by Harlan Ellison. Get all of my little weights here to try and, it's fine. I'll just hold it. When I wrote The Place with No Name for Ed Furman, and he published it in F and SF in 1969, he had many outraged letters and a number of cancellations of subscriptions. That was a story in which I toyed with the idea that Christ had had a homosexual liaison with Prometheus. When I wrote Basilisk for FNSF in 1972, a story in which I attacked not just our continued criminal presence in Vietnam, but made it quite clear that I considered all you stay-at-home support the war effort types as vile a pack of killers as William Calley, Ed Furman received threatening letters and more cancellations. When I rewrote the Book of Genesis from the viewpoint of the snake in The Deathbird in 1973 and suggested, as had dear sweet old Mark Twain, that if you really thought the universe was ruled by God and you looked around at the state of the universe, you would be forced to the conclusion that God is a malign thug. All those good and tolerant children of God and assorted other weirdos canceled their subscriptions by the drove. Singular. I wasn't that big a deal. Only one small drove. Croatoan in 1975 was interpreted by Right to Life advocates as a pro-abortion story, and they canceled. It was viewed as an anti-female story by some feminists, and they canceled. It was viewed as an anti-abortion story by many liberals, and they canceled. The fact that the story was concerned with the ethics of responsibility and was concerned with abortion and or feminism only as much and in the same way as Moby Dick is concerned with cetacean philosophy, seemed to escape everyone who wrote poor Ed Furman and called him a miserable son of a bitch for continuing to publish that swine motherfucker, Ellison. The toad of fantasy, the antichrist of science fiction, the dark swimmer in the polluted sea of depraved reject mainstream fiction. Sound of sack, but lyre, dulcimer, and kazoo. The sound of sack, but lyre, dulcimer, and kazoo. I went and had a vasectomy. Thank you, Hannah, for dropping historical terms. Indeed. Yeah, there's some language in this one, apparently. Clearly, he is incensed. So, one day about a year ago, when I was late getting a story into Ed, which is usually the case, I'm always Harlequin late, poor Ed. And I was on the long-distance line trying to con and jolly him into extending my deadline by a few days, I said to him, Ed, tell me something. Why is it, when you run the kind of apparently troublemaking stories I write, and you keep getting so many subscription cancellations and rotten letters from these turkeys, why is it you keep running my work? And Ed, who's an even tougher son of a bitch than I am, though his gentle and gentlemanly manner covers it so well, only Audrey knows it for sure, said, well, I'll tell you. Even if I didn't think they were good stories, which I do, I'd keep running your work and keep putting your name on the cover because every time I run one of your stories, I have twice as many people sign on as I do cancel. Also, if you didn't know, Harlan Ellison is a little arrogant. That's not to say that what he relates there isn't true. Just, he was a little bit full of himself. And possibly not undeservedly so. Just that he was. Let me try. This gutter wants to hide the words from me. I gotta confess, he stopped me with that one. I sat there grinning wryly and shaking my head. He could have buttered me, or he could have said, well, kiddo, someone has to publish your shit. Or he could have just shrugged it off, but he didn't. He hit me right in my truth, and I flashed on that scene in the movie, The Longest Yard, where Burt Reynolds, in the words of the scenarist Tracy Keenan Wynn, says, you know what the trouble with my life has been? I'll tell you. I got my shit together. I've always had my shit together. You just can't lift it. So here comes chill, truthful Ed Furman, about 2 years ago, saying to me, let's do a Harlan Ellison issue of F and SF. Hi, Conciliants. His writing combines bitterness, mean-spiritedness, and a lust for life, all while challenging traditional perception. Yes, indeed. There's a reason he's described in the first sentence of the encyclopedia article as being controversial. What do I have to do to deserve it, Ed? Drop dead? No, just write a story. That seemed easy enough. But, well, hell, I didn't get it done. So he did the Damon Knight issue first, and I can't beef about that. Damon's a good old boy, and even though he thinks I disremember the pasts we shared, I like to see these venerable father figures get an accolade from time to time, and finally my time has rolled around, much to the chagrin and annoyance of the turkeys. But here comes Ed, again. Even after I said I wanted to do 3 stories for the issue, not just 1. Because Ray Bradbury had done 2 for his issue a few years ago, but nobody had ever done 3. And I hoped that by doing 3, it would annoy that growing multitude that conceives of me as an arrogant, gauche loudmouth who never knows when to leave well enough alone. But even so, here comes Ed suggesting I do an introduction to the issue, just like the anthologies and collections I put together. It occurs to me that Ed Furman has a thick vein of suicidal behavior in him. So I'm sitting here in George Alec Effinger's apartment on Britannia Street in New Orleans, while Bev and George and gorgeous Susan are out hustling for beads and doubloons at the Rex Parade. It's Mardi Gras, and I'm inside writing words for Ed Freeman instead of having a hell of a good time goofing off. And I'm wondering just how much truth Ed and you readers can handle in the honorable name of Up Front. And I decide, screw it. Let them have it all, because it's been a shitty few months, and maybe just this once, the clowns who are pissed off that Silverberg and Maltzberg and Lupoff and Effinger and the rest of us don't want sci-fi on our books will get sufficiently doused with cold truth so they'll stop looking at those of us who write this stuff with that peculiar brand of tunnel vision that is half defecation and half hatred. I don't know why it bounces. There's no reason for the camera to bounce. Come on. Now, what the hell's he angry about? Every time I turn around, that creep Ellison is shooting off his big mouth about some fancied crime or other. Can't open my morning paper or turn on the box without hearing that strident voice complaining about some damn thing or other. What the devil does he have to be angry at? He makes a lot of money, he gets laid regularly. There are even people dumb enough to think he has some writing talent. And here he's got this whole bloody magazine devoted to feeding his twisted ego. You'd think he'd have enough grace to just say something short and polite and let his stories do the talking for him. But no, he's angry again. Now what? Angry? Heaven forfend. Gentle readers, I wouldn't want to disturb your sleep. Nevertheless, in the spirit of creative troublemaking, come with me to the October 4th, 1976 issue of Publishers Weekly, the Bible of the book industry. In the pages of Publishers Weekly, one can gauge one's stature in the publishing world, assess one's worth with one's peer group, and more importantly, with the plantation owners who keep us poor wretches laboring in their fields. Let us glance at the cover of the October 4th issue of Publishers Weekly. If anybody wants to find that cover and share a link, please do, because I was not prepared. I didn't know that was going to come up. All right. October 4th, 1976 issue of Publishers Weekly, where we see a full-page ad for Sterling Hayden's first novel, Voyage. Putnam's has taken this ad, as they have the next 10 pages, to announce their winter list. It's unveiling time for one of the major publishers, and they're stating for all the world to see the importance of their forthcoming titles. Come with me, then, on this voyage of status and hope. I promise you, it'll be worth the trip. Now, we start with Sterling Hayden. He gets almost 100 large type words of thrilling copywriter's adrenaline, including announcements that Voyage is a full selection of the Book of the Month Club. Paperback rights have been sold for more than $500,000. There will be TV appearances by the author, as well as major national advertising, publicity and promotion, not to mention a 50,000 copy first printing. Add to all this a snappy perspective photo of the book itself and the fact that it's on the front cover of Publishers Weekly, and only the dullest among us can fail to perceive that this is a big book. Well, okay, Hayden can write. Wanderer, back in 1963, his autobiography, was a smashing book. He deserves all this attention. No complaints. Now we open the issue and plunge pell-mell into Putnam's winter list, in order of importance and, as Putnam's views it, saleability. Pages 2 and 3 contain 6 books, 3 to a page, still with full cover photos of each book, titles set in large, black, eye-catching type, each one with a dense block of promotional copy, and each one bearing the potent slug line, major advertising and promotion. Among these books are a biography of Clark Gable, a dazzling biography that reads like the most romantic novel, a book of startlingly intimate portraits titled Ginger, Loretta, and Irene Who? Each of these 6 is trumpeted as being the forerunner of a motion picture version, or is to be accompanied by TV appearances by the author, or is a full selection of this book club or that. Impressive. Pages 4 and 5, another 6. Each one to receive major advertising and promotion, another 6 full cover photos, 6 more blocks of breathless advertising copy, and on and on. Page 6, 6 books on one page, but still with full cover photos, albeit smaller, of course. The titles all say 9 Moons Wasted by Marianne Lamont, This Other Eden by Marilyn Harris, Foxglove Summer by Nadra Gray, Sweet's Folly by Fiona Hill, and more hype copy. Page 7 has 2 more romances, one by Jean Plady and one by Claire Rayner. Thank you, Key Squared. As well as a Jack Douglas book of funny misadventures, whatever that means. 3 on this page, each with major advertising and etc. Full cover photos, a lot of hype. Quotes. All right, let me find this. Oh, no worries, Key Squared. I'm gonna attempt to grab that real quick. If it lets me. Text. I'll just drop this into a window over here so that I can show you the cover that he was referring to. Thank you, Key Squared. All right. This is the magazine that he is vociferously analyzing. And there is the Sterling Hayden Voyage cover that he was referring to. So far, he's just complaining. I haven't seen a point yet. Page 8 and 9, 6 and 6, including such well-promoted winners as Moon Signs by Sybil Leek, Sinister People, The Looking Glass World of the Left-Hander, Gilbert and Sullivan and Their Victorian World, and a book of myths and heroes of the Viking Age. Each has a cover photo, each has a block of copy, each has its title in easily read, heavy black headline type. On page 9, 4/5 of the page is devoted to 6 titles, 2 westerns and 4 mysteries. Each one has a full cover photo, each one has a big, bold title, each one has a block of promotional copy wherein the words spectacular, taut, exciting, delightful, gripping, intriguing, and exciting, new appear with the frequency of chocolate chips in a Famous Amos cookie. Now pay close attention. At the bottom of page 9, positionally, only the minutest fraction more important than the books on gardening and microwave cookery that live on page 10 are 4 titles in the bottom 1/5 of the page. These 4 books are labeled with a genre designation as no other books in this 54-book list have been ghettoized. The label, not to put too fine or obvious a point on it, is science fiction. The 4 books are Spider Robinson's first novel, the new F.M. Busby, and the new Paul Anderson, and Our Lady of Darkness by Fritz Lieber. There are no cover photos. There is no advertising hype. There is no explanatory copy block. The titles are small, no words like exciting or taut or even spectacular, just the title of the book, the author's name, the Library of Congress catalog number, date of publication, and price. Fritz Lieber's first novel in 8 years, down at the very bottom of the next to last page of his publisher's seasonal trumpeting. Fritz Lieber, the finest fantasist in the world, a man whose work has influenced every writer of imaginative literature since the 30s. Wonderful, magical Fritz Lieber, before whom Bradbury and Sturgeon and Norton and Goldman and Barth and Vonnegut bow, not to mention Robinson, Busby, Anderson, and even yours truly, the maddest egomaniac of them all, Fritz Lieber, very likely the best of all of us, the man who has won more awards than anyone else in the genre, the man whose words have lifted this too often wretched category to Olympian heights, more times than anyone cares to mention. Fritz Lieber's first novel in 8 years is buried at the bottom of Putnam's discard pile, secure in their 1,200 copy library sale without major advertising and promotion, and screw the old man. Fritz Lieber's first novel in 8 years isn't as worthy of attention as the Tyrone novel of an actor, no matter how well it's written. It isn't as important as Sybil Leek's astrological bullshit. It isn't as important as a pair of westerns. It isn't as important as a six-pack of insipid romantic novels. Why is that asshole Ellison angry? Well, now why does he insist science fiction be deleted from his books and nowhere be permitted in advertising or promotion of what he writes? Though God knows it's virtually impossible to stop half-witted collegiate reporters from slapping sci-fi into the headline when they interview him for college lectures, Ellison is angry, gentle leaders, because Zsa Zsa Gabor has unlimited access to the Johnny Carson show, where her observations on fiscal responsibility are only slightly less illuminating than Don Rickles' views of the ethical structure of the universe. And one of our finest young sci-fi writers can't fight off the medical collection agencies trying to collect from his last 3 major operations while he waits with happy thoughts about his 4th exploratory coming up next month. The Big Mouth is angry because the bestseller lists include the mediocre dribblings of Leon Uris, Rod McEwen, Jacqueline Suzanne, Alan Drury, and Harold Robbins, while another of our giants of sci-fi lives in a one-room apartment in the slum section of a major American city, sitting on the edge of his bed with his typewriter on a kitchen chair, his Hugos shoved away on a high shelf because he hasn't room for them in that cramped space where he exists in poverty. You don't know me. You don't know any of us. You live in your little utopia of dreams, not realizing that the men and women you totemize at conventions return in too many cases to lives to anonymity and financial deprivation. You are instantly on your guard against any of us promoting ourselves, selling out to make a decent living, without understanding that most of the terrific publishers whom you revere still pay the biggest name authors little better than they did 25 years ago when a loaf of bread was 13 cents and a cup of coffee was a nickel. You buy rip-off cassettes of the writers' speeches and readings without understanding that you are contributing to the theft of annuities. You think it mercenary and bad taste when writers demand payment for their appearances at conventions. You think all of us live in crystal palaces surrounded by slavish toadies who do our bidding for the glory of being in the presence magical. And when one or another of us says, "Why, when I'm writing brilliant novels of deep human perceptivity, does Perry Rodin sell millions of copies while my books go out of print?" and then opts out of the rat race, you bare your fangs and run white feather numbers on us. I don't know what that means. Run white feather numbers on us? Traitor to the cause! Quisling! Coward! Sour grapes! Is that like tar and feather? Is that what he's... I don't know. You don't know me, and I don't know you. I don't know any of you who write me letters and tell me either how my stories have altered your lives immeasurably or how my stories are kicked and twisted, or how my stories are sick and twisted and how I obviously hate women because I had a dog eat a girl in one of them. How can you know people who refuse to permit your humanity? How can you relate to people who either see you as a monster whose works are created solely to shock, solely to shock and corrupt the natural order, or who defy you as if you were the shade of Voltaire? How can I know when you choose to read craziness into my words? When you think every story I write is an accurate and faithful representation of my life? When if I write about homosexuality or drug addiction or venality or violence, you start your imbecilic rumor mill that I'm gay, a junkie, greedy, beyond rationality, or a crazed killer? You think I jest? Let me give you an apocryphal one. Several years ago, at the last science fiction convention I attended without being paid a speaking fee to appear, the World Convention in Washington, D.C., I found myself quite late one night, wasted and exhausted, standing in front of an elevator, waiting for the car to arrive to take me upstairs to my floor, to my room, to my bed, to blessed sleep. Understand, it was 3 or 4 in the morning. I was weary beyond belief and minding my own business. As I stood there waiting, a rather large, fleshy young man festooned with buttons, saying things like, Fiawall and Tanstoffel and SF fans eat their young, approached the elevator. When he saw me, he did a double take. Then an expression I've come to recognize and despise crossed his face. It was that insipid meddling of antagonism and superciliousness that I have learned from bitter experience precedes some smart-ass remark intended to make the fan think he's into clever repartee. As these remarks usually emanate from terminal acne teenagers with overactive thyroids and underdeveloped manners, I have yet to be gifted with a line that does not reek of cliché and sophomorism. You don't know me, I'm 42 years old, and I've spent a good part of my life with the wittiest, cleverest, most innovative people of my time. I've heard the best and the brightest indulging their conversational muses. Sorry, it's bugging me what this is doing as far as the bouncing. I don't know why it does that. But here, I'm going to try this now, because I think the foam is actually making things worse. Where was I? Some great lines, a lot of wacky lineages, terrific humor and originality, and you pishers. You really think some derivative cornball insult out of St. Louis or Joplin is going to be new to me? Be even the fleetingest momentary... Thank you, Key Squared. There's definitely some vitriol in this letter by Ellison here. Let's see. You really think some derivative cornball insult out of St. Louis or Joplin is going to be new to me? Be even the fleetingest momentarily clever so you'll receive a dollop of cheap attention your miserable little ego demands? Don't be ridiculous. When you can beat Groucho Marx or Bella Abzug or Mel Torme with a clever line, then you can come around and try to bug me. Until then, stay in the Pony League. The elevator arrived, the doors opened, I entered, and the beefy adolescent did the same. I pushed the button for my floor, which was quite high up in the building, but the kid didn't push a button for his floor, if I thought about it, and you must remember, I was really out of it, just hanging against the wall with my eyes down, and my energy level low. I suppose I concluded he was on the same floor as I. But no sooner had the doors closed than the kid struck a pose, arms folded, legs apart, staring at me with insolence as if about to say something devastating. I hung against the wall thinking, give me a little slack, will ya, kid? No bullshit tonight, I'm too tired. Yeah, Stephen Joyce, just a touch. But the rudeness of that kind of simp is beyond measure, and beyond logic or restraint. He stood there arrogantly and said, "You're a lot shorter than I thought you'd be." I ignored him. I was in no mood. Anyone playing with a full deck would have taken the hint. It was by no means a subtle hint. I clearly didn't want to be messed with. But like so many of his type, stupidity and unjustified arrogance make unsatisfactory bedmates, and he thought he was stacking points because I hadn't told him to shut up or punched him out or done something that would permit him to lie to his friends about how he'd destroyed Ellison. So he kept it up, kept insulting me, a total stranger, all the way up to my floor. Then when the elevator slowed and was stopping, I looked up and moved toward the front doors of the cage. He stepped in front of me, arms akimbo. I stood there as the elevator rose to a stop and waited for him to move, but he didn't. He just stood in front of me, facing me, hands on his hips, as if daring me to do something. It not only became clear to me at this point that he didn't live on the same floor as I, but that he very likely had taken the entire elevator trip just to piss me off. As the doors opened behind him, without even looking, I reached out very quickly with my right hand and closed my fingers around his throat. Not hard enough to crush the sucker's windpipe, but hard enough to propel him backward easily. Out of the elevator, around in a half circle, and pushed him back into the elevator just as the doors closed. It was all done very smoothly, very quickly, and with an absolute minimum of emotional involvement. He had been an impediment to my progress toward a good night's sleep, and I had simply moved him. But as I turned around from the closed elevator doors, I saw what I had missed seeing when the doors had first opened, probably because my eyes were downcast and I was concentrating on grabbing the simp's throat. Standing there, mouths opened, gaping at the sight of the killer and his prey, was a group of 6 or 8 fans who had apparently left a party and were on their way down to the lobby. They had seen the doors open, and without warning, the crazed Ellison had attacked this poor, defenseless fan. I said nothing to them, simply turned down the corridor and went to my room and went to bed. But the next day, the rumor all over the convention hotel was that Ellison had thrown a fan down an elevator shaft. Many people believed it. None of them bothered to ask why the police hadn't been called or how I'd managed to get the elevator doors open when the cage wasn't there so my victim could be tossed down a shaft, or if the victim was dead, and if he was, had the body been removed, or was it still lying down there at the bottom, broken, and beginning to smell bad, and why hadn't Ellison been arrested? They simply believed it. They don't know me, and I don't want to know them. And just to deny the rumor mill any fresh material, not that it needs actual material when it works so well from whole cloth, let me tell you where the 3 new stories in this issue of FNSF came from. In that way, at least, I'll save myself from having to endure the boring recitations in half-witted fanzines that purport to be knowledgeable analyses of what I really meant. Analyses of the twisted psychosexual references that fill the stories. I'll free myself of having to bear that silliness, at least for these 3 stories, which means all the rest are still fair game for the functional illiterates who do most of the fanzine critiques. Working with the little people was written in one straight stretch of effort in the front window of a bookstore on Charing Cross Road in London, Tuesday, 20 July 1976. The bookstore was Words and Music, and I was reprising my sitting in the bookstore window writing a story a day number as detailed more thoroughly in FNSF last October. It is not a representation of myself in any way. It is, I suppose, an open letter to a famous fantasy writer on whose wonderful stories I grew up. This writer is a person who has become a good friend, someone I love, and because of my respect and affection for this writer, and because of the germinal effect on my writing that the body of this writer's work had on me during my formative years, it is impossible for me to say to this writer, "You stopped writing your best work over 20 years ago." It is impossible for me to take this writer aside and say, "Just for a moment, let's forget that we're both eminently successful and that we're canonized by fans and critics. They don't know, but we know. We know what each of us is writing, and we know when the time has come that we're only indulging ourselves because our fame is such that they'll buy whatever we write, no matter how ineffective or slapdash. For just a moment, let's forget. We're who we are, and just look at what you've been doing for 20 years. No, it's not possible for me to tell this writer of classic stature that somehow the publicity and the fame and the totemization have gotten in the way of writing the stories that made the fame in the first place. Ego forms the greater part of whatever nameless amalgam it is that sustains a writer. We live off it, every one of us. No matter how ostensibly humble or arrogant we may seem to our readers, the mildest of us, nonetheless, has an ability to sustain himself through sheer will, through sheer belief in the cosmic correctness of what we do. Every word we set down, every choice of line and color and structure is surfeited with that ego. I cannot tell this writer that the vision has grown dim. The talent is still there, as rich and as dark as before, but the world and its praise, its wonders and treasures, has gotten in the way. I may be wrong. The latter stories may be the best this writer has ever produced, but unless I read all unless I read all the critics wrong, and unless I read the tenor of this writer's audience wrong, and unless I read my own loving perceptions of this writer's work wholly incorrectly, the main path has been abandoned. Hi, Meridu! We are in the middle of a diatribe by Harlan Ellison. We have yet to get to the response by Charles Sheffield. So this story is my gentle way of speaking to this writer. Perhaps the writer will recognize what I am doing in Working with the Little People, and perhaps I'll get a phone call and this writer, with whom I talk frequently, will say, I read your story. Did you mean me? And I'll say fearfully, yeah. And perhaps the writer will say, let's talk. I'm not sure you know what the hell you're talking about. But at least you cared enough to say it and risk my wrath and the loss of my friendship. So at least let's sit down alone and thrash it out. I hope that's the way it will happen. As for the second story, Alive and Well and On a Friendless Voyage, well, that one seems to distress my friends a bit. Arthur Cover says he thinks it may be self-pitying. Richard DeLapp wonders if I'm not exploiting my own life. George Alec Effinger thinks it's one of my most important stories, but most of my friends who've read it refuse to talk to me about it. I can understand that. This is one of those few stories I've written not only to write a story to provide an entertainment, but as personal therapy. I wrote it during the period after the breakup of my recent marriage. It was my fourth marriage, and not one I entered into lightly. You see, you don't know me. Many of you think that 4 marriages is an indication of frivolity or confusion or bad judgment. They may be all of those. But as far as I'm concerned, they are also indications that I'm alive. Everyone wants action, adventure, and danger in their life, but no one wants risk. Everyone wants guarantees of security. Friends, there is no security this side of the grave. I've said that before, I'll say it again. I married in June of 1976, and I separated on November 20th of 1976. She was sleeping with another man. That seems pretty slim reason for dissolution of a marriage, particularly in my case, because I've never felt that merely because you marry someone, that your mate's body belongs to you. Slavery went out of fashion a long time ago. But there was lying, duplicitousness, insincerity, and a great many other elements that destroyed trust. And without trust, without friendship, there is nothing. One is left with dust. I loved her. In the words of one of the characters in the story, without reserve. I showed it in a million ways every hour of the day that we spent together. But love is hardly enough to sustain a relationship, dear friends, and it fell apart. And so did I. And one night, 3 or 4 months after I had asked her to leave and she had gone to live with her paramour, I was sitting in the darkness of my living room watching the American Film Theater production of Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris on our Los Angeles unedited movie channel. And something I cannot even remember in that production, some moment of melancholy as expressed through Brel's exquisite songs, sparked the basic idea for this story. I'm frequently asked where my ideas come from. I usually can remember where the story was written and under that special circumstance. And under what special circumstance. But less often I'm able to recall just what precise elements came together in my mind to form the basic concept of a given piece of writing. That's the case with Alive and Well and On a Friendless Voyage. All I know for certain is that I went and sat down at the typewriter and did the first 2 pages of the story, and I realized from the start that it was my way of writing out my pain and loneliness. You see, you don't know me, and I don't know you. The ways in which you bring your pain under control, the ways in which you maintain your sanity, they are not mine. I live in another world. Each of us does, but I know this of myself. I can keep going. That's one of the things life is all about, maintaining. And that is what the story is about. In the space of 3 or 4 months toward the end of last year, the most terrible period in my entire life, my mother died, my wife cuckolded me and left. I suffered staggering financial difficulties, endured personal illness, went more than a little crazy, but maintained. Now I'm on the other side of it all. And that's what the story is about. It is the grail I have brought back from that awful place. In the artifact, it is the artifact that shows I felt the fire but did not let it destroy me. All of the foregoing, sententious, though it may read, is straight from where my thoughts live to you. Take it or leave it. It's not as if none of you had ever asked. You can see where he got his reputation. Yeah, key squared. But my favorite of the 3 stories in this issue is the one called Jeffy is 5. Jeffty is 5. I began this story during a New Year's party at the home of my friend Walter Koenig. We were all sitting around in Walter and Judy's living room, and there was a group of people who were mostly the Koenig's friends, not mine. Nice people. I just didn't know them very well. And I was sitting there sort of kind of doing and thinking nothing, just goofing and relaxing, playing with Walter's kids, when I intentionally misoverheard a line of conversation. Let me explain that. Quite a lot of the time, probably most of the time, or probably more of the time than a psychiatrist would consider sane or rational, I intentionally hear things wrong. If someone says, I went to the Chinese hand laundry this afternoon, I visualize it in my mind as an enormous steamy plant where they launder Chinese hands. Or how about this one? The other night I was talking to Nancy Schwartz and one or the other of us mentioned tubal ligation. I chose to hear it as tubal libation and proceeded to run half a dozen horrendous puns on the historic precedent of magic being attendant on the drinking of menstrual blood. Oh boy. Don't be shocked, dummies. Sturgeon once wrote an entire novel on the theme. Then Nancy did tubal ligation, I did tonal relation, she did tribal locution, and we were busy for half an hour being as improbable as possible. Because of this flaw in my nature, this desire to hear things a little stranger than the speaker intended, I heard a snatch of perfectly ordinary conversation as something like this. So I went to see Jeff, and he was still 5. He's always 5. And my mind flashed on a little boy who's been snared at the age of 5, who never gets any older, and I asked Walter for a typewriter, and he brought me a portable, and I plunked it on a chair and did the first several pages of the story in this issue, except I rewrote those first 2 hurried pages considerably. But the story would go no further. It wasn't until I came down here to New Orleans that I discovered what my story was about. From New Year's till February, it just festered and simmered. But then, while talking to George and Beverly last evening, while talking about how times have changed and about how we're losing so many wonderful things that meant so much to us and which we took so much for granted, did I understand what Jeffty and his story was all about. And so today, I've been sitting here writing this introduction, and when it gets too boring, I'll stop and work on Jeffty a little. And Jeffty is so real to me, so important to me, that I'm writing about him very slowly. I don't want the story to be ended. I want Jeffty to go on forever. Because you don't know me, and you don't know that there's a part of Jeffty that is me, very much me, achingly me. Which brings me, I suppose, to the end of this introduction that poor Ed Furman so foolishly suggested I write. I swear to you, I had intended only to say thank you very much for coming this evening, folks, and it's been a terrific pleasure writing for you. I intended to be brief and very gracious, but who the hell would I be kidding? I'm not that gracious, and if I'd ever wanted to be brief, I'd either have become a poet or taken up selling Fruit of the Loom underwear. So, 6,000 words later, I tag off mumblingly, wondering precisely what I had to say that was endemic to this special issue of FNSF, probably nothing of any consequence, except to point out that all the King's horses and all the King's men and all the Academy's critics and all the establishment's analysts and all of fandom's turkeys and all of their fanzine editors cannot fathom or reconstruct the mind that writes these stories, nor the minds that write Lieber's stories and Sturgeon's stories, or Borges's stories, or Vonnegut's stories, or Wilhelm's stories, or Effinger's stories. We are all alone, each of us, existing in the worlds we make fresh each day. And those of you who are granted the views into our worlds are like tourists going into terra incognita after we've blazed the trails. But don't ever fool yourselves, not even those of you who make your living from literary analyses, don't for a second fool yourselves into thinking you've got our number. Because even if I reveal some small truth about the human heart in my work, strictly serendipitously, strictly by chance, I really don't know you. And that's the way I want to keep it, because I subscribe to what H.L. Mencken said. It is precisely at their worst that human beings are most interesting. I want to keep being surprised by all of you. How boring it would be if all of you were as predictable and dull as so many of you seem to be. Those of you out there whom I'll meet and write about one day, I don't know you. And for all the rest of you, believe it, kiddo, you don't know me. Whew. Well, there was some emotion in that. Key squared. Harlan Ellison, Twitter reply guy before there was a Twitter, which is quite an achievement, really. So that is the foundation upon which the argument lays. The debate between Sheffield and Ellison. No, tell us how you really feel. You think this man writes science fiction? Well, he would disagree. So that was published in July of 1977. And I'd never read it before. I didn't know anything about it. But when I went looking for stuff by Charles Sheffield, I found 8 and 9. Yeah. I found a response that Charles Sheffield wrote as an open letter and published in response to Ellison's thing there. So just one second, let me find it real quick. Yes, page 22. So we are now moving into the pages of Thrust, Science Fiction in Review. This is issue number 9, fall of 1977. I'm gonna double check because, yeah. And we're gonna go to page 22, which is where Charles Sheffield responds. Harlan, come home. An open letter to Harlan Ellison. By Charles Sheffield. Hi, Bit Rebellious. Let's zoom in a little bit more here. I was so excited when I came across this back and forth between them. I haven't read it yet. I just know it exists, and I'm so excited to see how this goes. Harlan, come home. An open letter to Harlan Ellison by Charles Sheffield. I just read your article in Fantasy and Science Fiction. You don't know me, I don't know you, July 1977. You are right. It is a crying shame that science fiction appears so low on the totem pole of Publishers Weekly. That means no prestige for science fiction writers, and less money, too. The publisher's attitude is worse than bad. It's disgraceful, and it would be nice if the world were different. On that point, as on most things in your article, I agree with you completely. Well, that's a great way to start your argument. I agree with everything you said. We agree on the problem. We disagree on the solution. Your approach is to make sure that your works are not tainted with the label of science fiction anywhere on the books or in the advertising. Silverberg and Maltzberg are following the same line, which seemed to work well for Vonnegut. Fine. But do you really believe that you are no longer writing science fiction? If you say yes, I'll be suspicious. You started too young, and it's too deep in your system to be banished so easily. You can call it something else. Mainstream. But I'll bet it reads like science fiction. If you find that premise even halfway plausible, follow me in a logical exercise. If the best writers in a field say they have left it, that field will be measured by the output of those who remain. Logic demands that those who remain are not the best writers. The literary merit of the average product, measured by any yardstick you care to choose, has to go down. Keep this up for a few years, and lo and behold, Publishers Weekly won't have much regard to the standards of writing. Rates will be minimal, and publicity poor to non-existent. If you believe that you are one of the better writers of science fiction, you also have to believe that your departure will weaken science fiction. Only if you think you are worse than average writer of science fiction can you argue that your absence will help the rest of us. This wouldn't be relevant if science fiction writers were like reptiles laying their eggs and wandering away. To hell with the next generation. Let them raise themselves and fight their own battles. It isn't that way. The field is tight-knit, and some writers care about and encourage the up-and-comers. They do it, even though the youngsters are now competition for a limited market. Somewhere in New York City, there is a teenage fan and would-be science fiction writer. He is your spiritual heir. Right now, he is producing the most awful garbage you can imagine. Remember? But one day he will be producing works of high quality, works that say something new. When that glorious day arrives, he will find that he can't get accepted for what he is, a good writer. It's 1988, but he is tagged as a science fiction writer. And that label is still a derogatory one. Why? Because you, and others like you, who could label all their works science fiction and continue to educate publishers as to the quality of writing in the field, have instead elected to deny your birthright for dollars and for a little respect from publishers who don't know or understand what science fiction is all about, and who couldn't write it themselves if they tried for 100 years. You, Silverberg and Maltzberg, should be leading the battle for science fiction. Hi, Bit Rebellious. Is this a sneaky way to get you into science fiction writing? I don't know. I won't tell you not to write science fiction. Ooh, Shadows of Life, thank you for the 20 stream streak. Calmly walks through the stacks, not streaking. You, Silverberg and Maltzberg, should be leading the battle for science fiction, not in full retreat from the front. If you don't fight, who will fight? The newcomers with no weapons? Science fiction needs leaders. And a few rude and stupid fans notwithstanding, you'll get more esteem and affection as a leader of science fiction writing, your first home, than you will ever receive as a swimmer in the cold and impersonal mainstream. Did you read Mabakov's obituaries? They were dry, analytical essays with no drop of sorrow or personal grief. What I'm saying here isn't so new. Take a look at Browning's poem, The Lost Leader. See how he felt when Wordsworth sold out and accepted the position of poet laureate. Just for a handful of silver he left us. We that had loved him so, followed him, honored him, lived in his mild and magnificent eye. I's a little doubtful about the mild bit, but most of it applies. As you said, you don't know me, and I don't know you. I don't know if you make a good living from your writing, or if you are really struggling to make ends meet, though I must say I have my suspicions. That being the case, there is one way you can silence me absolutely. We all have to eat. Tell me that you can't make a living when you publish with a science fiction label. That you can only get by if you call your work by another name. Then I can't argue further. I have to say, do your thing and go in peace. But if you can't look me in the eye and tell me that I say, But if you can't look me in the eye and tell me that, I say, come home, Harlan Ellison. All is forgiven. Charles Sheffield. And then, just because it was referenced, they include a copy of Browning's The Lost Leader. I don't even have to go and look it up. It's right here. Woo! Just for a handful of silver he left us. Just for... Sorry. I need the camera to be just slightly closer because I can't make out this font on the screen in front of me. Just give me 1 second while I adjust so I can read this and do it some justice. I don't know how good my justice will be, having never read it before. I love sight reading live on the internet. Sorry, just get this positioned well. Okay. Just for a handful of silver he left us, just for a riband to stick in his coat. Found the one gift of which fortune bereft. Okay, there's some liberties being taken with words. It's just gonna take me 1 second here. I'm gonna try this again. Just for a handful of silver he left us, just for a riband to stick in his coat. Found the one gift of which fortune bereft us, lost all the others she lets us devote. They with the gold to give doled him out silver, so much was theirs who so little allowed. How all our copper had gone for his service. Rags, they were purple, his heart had been proud. We that had loved him so, followed him, honored him, lived in his mild and magnificent eye, learned his great language, caught his clear accents, made him our pattern to live and to die. Shakespeare was of us, Milton was for us, Burns, Shelley were with us, they watch from their graves. He alone breaks from the van and the freeman, he alone sinks to the rear and the slaves. We shall march prospering, not through his presence. Songs may inspirit us, not from his lyre. Deeds will be done while he boasts his quiescence, still bidding crouch whom the rest bade aspire. Blot out his name, then record one lost soul more, one task more declined, one more footpath untrod, one more devil's triumph and sorrow for angels, one wrong more to man, one more insult to God. Life's night begins. Let him never come back to us. There would be doubt, hesitation, and pain, forced praise on our part, the glimmer of twilight, never glad, confident morning again. Best fight on well, for we taught him. Strike gallantly. Menace our heart ere we master his own. Then let him receive the new knowledge and wait us, ardent in heaven, the first by the throne. I'm not going to comment too much on Browning's poetry. I'm not in any way a poetry scholar. I see in the text of this poem the point Charles Sheffield was making and the reference to come home. Anyway, so Sheffield basically is like, okay, fine. You say you need to not be classed as science fiction because science fiction as a genre gets ignored by the publishing industry and doesn't receive the money and the support that it deserves. And so that's Sheffield's summation of what Ellison wrote. And then Sheffield's rebuttal to that is, if you insist on not being classed as science fiction and you consider yourself to be one of the better science fiction writers, you're dooming all future science fiction writers to the same anonymity that you feel has been thrust upon you. you need to stay in science fiction, identify as science fiction to educate the publishing industry about how good it can be so that those that come after will have support. So it's a decent enough argument, I suppose. That was fall of 77. Of course, he mentions 1988, looking 11 years into the future at some hypothetical author. Then we get a response from Ellison to Sheffield with another from Sheffield back to Ellison. I just have to find where they are. I don't think it's that one. I think it took until the next fall. Fall of 78? Oh, wait. I looked for all these, and it's not listed the same way, that's all. This is the spring of 78 issue of Thrust. F-14 on the cover? Oh. Here? Is that an F-14? Why is it in space? Hi, Iron Trout. Yes. Counter thrust is what it's under. The letter column. Page 34. Plot reason, probably Shadows of Life. Alright. Counter thrusts. As we've seen, Harlan Ellison is not afraid to write something lengthy. We have a letter in response to Sheffield's letter, followed immediately by a letter back from Sheffield to Ellison. So, zoom. I have identified the kind of rig I need to make the zooming smoother. I just have not gotten it purchased yet. Woo! Iron Trout. A magazine named Thrust would never happen now. Not unless it was an adult-themed magazine. Iron Trout. We commented on that earlier. Yeah, it would be a very different magazine. It would not be one that discusses it wouldn't be one that interviews science fiction authors and discusses the industry of science fiction publishing. Okay, so Harlan Ellison, open letter to Charles Sheffield and the readers of Thrust. This begins to assume the shape of the dilemma personified by an attempt at coaxing an autistic child to put the round peg somewhere other than in the square hole. Clearly, the goddamn people don't listen. My inclination is to just say piss off, but in the sweet name of reason, I'll try one more final exasperated time, so pay real close attention now. I do not write science fiction. Yes, perhaps when I began my career 25 years ago, 2.5 decades ago, a lifetime longer than most of Thrust's adolescent readers have been alive, for Christ's sake, I wrote a few stories that resemble what is commonly lumped under the general marketing label sci-fi. But that was a long time ago. Larry Niven writes science fiction, Clifford Seamack writes science fiction, Isaac and Ben and Gordy and Ursula and Hal write science fiction. I don't. Yes, Puddleglum. Wow, the ableism is strong with this one. Indeed, Puddle Club. Admittedly, back then, magazines that were that kind of magazine also mixed in stuff for prominent authors. Q squared, you're not wrong with that either. Okay, so this is where we really get into Ellison insists he's not a science fiction author. Jesus, folks. Don't take a look at what I write, whether you think it sucks or Jesus, folks. Just take a look at what I write, whether you think it sucks or otherwise. It's fantasy, it's allegory, it's mimetic. It ain't that stuff that lies between flashy covers with rocket ships on it. And every time they stick a monster or a rocket ship on my books, I go bugfuck. I'm kin to Poe, Kafka, Borges, Shirley Jackson, Bill Kotzwinkle, not Clark Heinlein and Frank Herbert. Why the hell are you all so bloody determined to make me misrepresent my product just to satisfy your own stupid need for the perpetuation of a category label? And finally, in the name of decency, stop telling me how to live my life, you assholes. Listen, Sheffield, I don't know you, but I herewith demand you leave your home, your wife, children, family, occupation, whatever you possess, and move at once to India, where I insist, in the name of humanity and honor, you devote your life to saving starving children. How do you like it, Sheffield? Is my demand any more offensive than you're telling me I have to lead the charge in the name of good old science fiction? Old school tie, battalion honor, and all that shit? I write what I write. What I want to write, not what you tell me to write. Where the hell do you get off telling me how I should use my talent? I should ignore a readership in the hundreds of thousands to pander to a readership in the hundreds simply because you have a fanatic, ghetto-loving reverence for that stupid newsstand marketing label? Fuck you! Just simply, directly, without any grace or attempt to placate you, fuck you! Yeah, he did liken himself to Poe. Iron Trout, you're not aware of Harlan Ellison? Did he liken himself to Poe? Because I would very strongly question that. Given that these days, Bill Kotzwinkle is most remembered for Superman and Talking Bears. Really? I didn't know who Bill Kotzwinkle was. Talking Bears? My best stories have been unread by this much vaunted science fiction fandom that never misses an opportunity like a venal old aunt or uncle who buys your soul when they loan you a few bucks to tell me, "We made you what you are today, Ellison. Where would you be if we didn't buy your books?" What horseshit! My books sell millions of copies here and abroad. Only a fraction are sold to fans. The rest are sold to people who want to read Ellison stories, not necessarily science fiction stories. I am the one who made me what I am today, nobody else. Hear the lunatic tremolo of egomania, Mr. Sheffield. Did you sit with me all those empty hours behind the typewriter? Did you go out and buy the Preparation H to shove the suppository up my ass because I developed piles from sitting and writing those 900 stories? Did you pound the pavement with me while I hawked my wares from editorial office to office when my home was just a series of nonsense syllables to editors? Or when my name, sorry, I just... Let me pause here in the vitriol of Harlan Ellison to say, welcome in, 16-bit Eric and Whimsies. It is great to see you. Thank you so much for the raid. If anybody is new here, welcome. This is Archival Adventures. I am Anthony Wright Day Hernandez, the Community Collections Archivist here at Virginia Tech, also known on the Twitterverse as Rogan27. If anybody here is not already following 16-bit Eric, you should be, because 16-bit Eric is an absolutely wonderful and amazing human who has the best community on Twitch, and incidentally does a lot of TTRPG actual plays, is a wonderful GM, has a new Star Trek actual play coming up, also is one of the founders of the Streampunks, a group that is having a fundraiser this coming Saturday. If you care to, pop on by over at twitch.tv/althaven on Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to help them out. Anyway, welcome in, everybody. It is great to see you. We are... I think anybody can call the historical terms command Puddleglum. Today we're looking at speculative fiction stuff, sci-fi. And we started, I went looking for something to share about Charles Sheffield, who wrote some of my favorite science fiction stories. And I came across an exchange between Charles Sheffield and Harlan Ellison, where Harlan Ellison insists he is not a science fiction author. And Charles Sheffield argues with him on that point. It started with a very lengthy article written by Harlan Ellison in the June 1977 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. It was followed by an open letter from Charles Sheffield to Harlan Ellison in the fall of 1977 Thrust, Science Fiction in Review. And now we are in the middle of Ellison's response to Sheffield, who had basically said that Ellison should embrace the label science fiction for his works because it would help the genre as a whole to no longer be ignored by publishers. Ellison didn't really respond favorably to that. I will note, Ellison uses very colorful language. There are many curse words. So, I'm going to pick up where I was. Let's see. My best stories have been unread by this much vaunted science fiction fandom that never misses an opportunity, like a venal old aunt or uncle who buys your soul when they loan you a few bucks to tell me, "We've made you what you are today, Ellison. Where would you be if we didn't buy your books?" What horseshit. My books sell millions of copies here and abroad. Only a fraction are sold to fans. The rest are sold to people who want to read Ellison stories, not necessarily science fiction stories. I am the one who made me what I am today, nobody else. Hear the lunatic tremolo of egomania, Mr. Sheffield. Did you sit with me all those empty hours behind the typewriter? Did you go out and buy the Preparation H to shove the suppository up my ass because I developed piles from sitting and writing those 900 stories? Did you pound the pavement with me while I hawked my wares from editorial office to office when my name was just a series of nonsense syllables to editors? Did you stand up beside me when all that insane backlash against New Wave came down? You made me what I am today? It is to laugh. How dare you accuse me of running from the battlefield, you simple-minded dungfuck? I've worked harder and longer to make this kind of writing accepted by the power brokers than any of you. What the hell have you done? You've patronized the Perry Rodins and the Star Wars and Star Treks and Howard ripoffs and every cretinous movie production that rediscovered 1929 science fiction. You've slavered over crap and purchased shit and driven writers like Bryant and Sturgeon and Silverberg and Farmer and Lieber and Effinger and Maltzberg and hundreds of others to the madhouse or the poor farm. You have no fucking taste, you self-righteous, tunnel-visioned lout. 12 hours have passed since I wrote the preceding line. My rage at Sheffield's piece and the juxtapositional publishing of Browning's cruel poem about Wordsworth has died down. Some of my friends arrived as I was writing, and they heard me speak to you, Mr. Fratz, on the phone. They thought I was going to get on a plane to Adelphi, Maryland, and kick off your and Mr. Sheffield's kneecaps. They have known me for many years, and like good friends, they love me and overlook my periodic fits of fury at the stupidities and brutalizations of the world. but they had never heard me quite so enraged. So they took me out for dinner, and we talked long and seriously into the night. The essence of their advice was, of course, forget it. What did it matter? Why was I worrying about such silliness? Put a lid on it. They're only fans, and they'll never understand. They'll never understand that I owe no allegiance to a category label, but am a hand servant to writing. The greater crusade, the holy chore. They'll never understand that my resigning from SFWA is a part of this whole problem of ghetto thinking. Well, the truth of the matter, Mr. Fratz and Mr. Sheffield and all the rest of you who are appalled at my bad taste in responding to being called a quitter, a coward, and a turncoat with wild rage, is that while you piddle around with your hobby, I am spending my life contributing to the commonweal in easily noted ways. I have started more writers on their way, contributed to their support, aided them financially and spiritually than all of you put together. I have done more symposiums, seminars, PR junkets, college lectures, and workshops, many of them out of my own pocket, than the lot of you can ever hope to do. I have spoken out. When it was unpopular, I have gone on the line and gone on the road in the name of good writing. I have done what I, as an individual, can do, and will continue to do it, as I will continue to write Ellison stories no matter what you think they should be labeled. This guy sounds like a lot of fun. Pompous, foul-mouthed a-hole would be my takeaway from this letter. Iron Trout, he definitely is coming across that way, yeah. It would be fun with a beep button. Sounds like a Reddit thread. I've never seen anyone use "it is to laugh" seriously before. You write sci-fi, I write fantasy. Some might technically be science fantasy. Yeah. Hi, Bastion Cider. Adelphi, Maryland does not have an airport. Interesting. Yes, there are lots of eyes. So he typed this screed out, had friends take him out to dinner and calm him down, and still spent his own money on stamps to send it. This is very on brand for Ellison, as I understand it. If anybody who came in on the raid is seeing the name Harlan Ellison and is like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? Ellison is the author who wrote the original script for The City on the Edge of Forever, the Guardian of Forever episode of the original Star Trek series where Kirk and Spock go back in time and accidentally cause Hitler to win World War II. He is the author who wrote the original script. He's also the same author who got really pissed off when they made some changes in filming the script and wanted his name taken off of it entirely and didn't want any association with it because they had changed it. And he basically threw a fit. So it's the same guy. We might now raise the question as science fiction fans, do we really want this guy? Okay, I'm going to keep going. But your curious crusade isn't mine. My sights are set higher. I despise the ghetto and I revile those who wish only to keep their little category intact. Sheffield suggests if the best writers leave, that the field will be judged by the worst. Well, that's fair. If Sturgeon and Dish and Wilhelm and Silverberg and, following the specious logic of Sheffield's argument, I move along, then shouldn't the field be judged by Lynn Carter and Jerry Purnell and the Star Trek books and Tolkien? Because those are the best-selling authors. And it's what the public has come to believe is science fiction. You crawl on your bellies like reptiles to worship at Star Wars' altar without taste or sense of an understanding of the effect such crap has on the reading habits of the mass mind. And yet you want your cake too. You want guys like me to stay in the boondocks with you writing 1929 drivel. That would be easy. I could make a lot of money doing it and pander to the taste of the groundlings. But I won't. I haven't deserted the noble genre of sci-fi. I'm marching to the beat of a different drummer, mine own, and that is the higher calling. It is the obligation every artist owes to his craft. My muse simply ain't yours, kiddo. You may see me as a traitor and a coward, but as Thoreau said, he serves the state best who opposes the state most. When I write for FNSF as opposed to Penthouse, it's because I chose to have my story appear there, and appearing in an SF magazine doesn't make me an SF writer. I'm just a writer, not a prize heifer to be paraded around for your benefit, so you can try and con the mainstream critics into ignoring the shit that dominates the category of science fiction. You drove Silverberg to an early retirement, but you'll never do it to me. I'm too fucking mean. I'll fight you clowns every step of the way. To what end? To the end of being my own man, my own kind of writer. Good or bad, I belong to no false carcasses. No false harasses? I don't know this word. Anyway, Dave Bischoff, smarter than most of you pissants, understands. Read his essay in your very own magazine. He knows intellectually what I'm saying here passionately. He has already come to perceive the falseness of the rah-rah bullshit idiots like Sheffield lay down. He knows why I quit SFWA and why I howl at all these open letters demanding I stay down with you in the mud. He seems to grasp at least the edge of the greater dream I and others hold. My anger is past. But the cruelty of your publishing that poem by Browning only firms me in my resolve. Sheffield is entitled to write whatever he wants to write about my cowardly desertion of the battalion, and you are entitled to publish it. You're even entitled to publish the poem. But in so doing, you destroy whatever faint vestiges of affectation I still hold for the genre and fandom where I started. Mark that, kiddo, where I started. The universe is bigger than fanzines and DAW books. And it is mine, because I care enough to go and take it. If I leave you behind, it's because you're content to delude yourselves that there is nobility in dwelling within a ghetto. God willing, you'll live out your days in blissful ignorance of the true state of affairs and never have to face the specters faced by Sturgeon, Lieber, Farmer, Vonnegut, Dish, Maltzberg, and myself. This moment of softness has been brought to you by the toilette tissue. Now go on and wipe your asses and find some other less verbal poor fuck to badger. My anger is past. Is it though? Exactly. Harass is from a Vonnegut novel, meaning something vaguely like people of like mind or family of choice. Interesting, Key Square. I didn't have any idea what that one was. Could his head get further up his own ass? Probably. Puddleglum, yes. Yes, he did call Tolkien a sci-fi author. Which Tolkien generally not a sci-fi author. Tolkien is a fantasy author, and would be conflated with sci-fi only if you were looking at the higher level genre of speculative fiction. But we could debate semantics. I don't think I would want to go up against Ellison on anything at this point, because wow! But Sheffield responds in the same issue. And I love, so I just love, I love the way Sheffield begins this response. I love it. I do enjoy quite a few of Sheffield's stories. And honestly, I don't know very many of Ellison's. But here we go. Charles Sheffield replies, "Good. Now that's out of your system, and you must be feeling a lot better. Put down the smoking pen, settle back, and concentrate. You can write well, but you can't think. Let's go over your letter and sort out the illogic in it. First of all, I think we can ignore the cussing and generous personal insults. They are full of sound and fury, but they don't add anything, although I must confess that simple-minded dungfuck has a certain charm. Remove the swearing, and what is left? Well, quote, I do not write science fiction. What I write is fantasy. It's allegory. It's mimetic. Perhaps 25 years ago, I wrote a few stories that resemble science fiction. If you want to choose a definition of science fiction that is so restrictive, I can't stop you. But this is the same Harlan Ellison who accepted a carload of Nebulas and Hugos, science fiction awards. If you feel strongly that you don't write that stuff, that you even despise it and the ghetto that it represents to you, was it ethical to accept those honors? Of course it was, because the long-suffering and much-abused fans have a broad view of science fiction, one that can embrace the Clark Heinlein Clement works and can also give a Hugo to the ones who walk away from Omelas. Is any Ellison work more of a parable? Is any further from rocket ship drivel? Stop telling me how to live my life. I don't care how you live it until it starts to affect my life. Then I care a lot. When you arbitrarily define science fiction as the ghetto, the mud, the boondocks, then it matters to me and to every writer and fan. If your books sell millions of copies here and abroad, it shouldn't matter to you if the covers show rockets, monsters, or the Mona Lisa. The books are bought by people who want to read Ellison stories, not necessarily science fiction stories. So why do you want to disavow the science fiction label so completely? I'm forced to speculate, but you would not be the first person to despise his origins when success turned his head. I should ignore a readership in the hundreds of thousands to pander to a readership in the hundreds? You've patronized the Perry Rodans and the Star Wars and Star Treks. You've slavered over crap and purchased shit. Wait a minute now. You can't have it both ways. If it's the few hundred fans who are buying all the Perry Rodans, they must be taking 1,000 copies each. Do you seriously believe that I am buying that junk? Isn't it obvious that the fans are not the ones who drool over drivel? Who are you writing to? Us or the mush-minded buyers of the popular rubbish? You don't need to be able to think to know these can't be the same groups. You just need to be able to count fans and junk sales. If Bryant and Sturgeon and Silverberg and Farmer and Lieber and Effinger and Maltzberg and hundreds of others have been driven to the poor farm, and you can bet that any copies of their books that did sell were bought by your fanatic, ghetto-loving former friends. By the way, Silverberg to the poor farm? Only, I'd have thought, to buy the place. They'll never understand that I owe no allegiance to a category label, but am a hand servant to writing, the greater crusade, the holy chore. My sights are set higher. When I write for FNSF as opposed to Penthouse, it's because I chose to have my name appear there. When you write for FNSF, you are read by people who care about writing and ideas, whereas Penthouse, you may feel that you can pursue a greater crusade there and raise the literary consciousness of their readers, but you leave me remarkably unconvinced. I think that's old Harlan Ellison there, peeping out between bare boobs and pubic hair, but the panting makes my eyes water. Sell for money. By all means, everybody should. As Sam Johnson pointed out, but don't then delude yourself as to the reason Penthouse buys your stories. They want your name. The name the lowly ghetto dwellers have helped build by their awards over these many years. That's all they're buying. They don't give a damn about literary excellence. Try them with a story under another name and see how long it takes you to get a rejection slip. The universe is bigger than fanzines and DAW books, and it is mine. Hear the lunatic tremolo of egomania, Mr. Sheffield. Indeed. You know, your letter offers so much scope for an ad hominem reply that it's hard to put the knife away. I resist the temptation for one reason only. Your reaction makes it clear that no words of mine can torment Harlan Ellison as cruelly as he can himself. The scientific vivisection of one nerve, till it is raw, comes from within. You hold the knife, and you flay yourself in public. Harley is 16, forever and immutably. It is apparent from your letter just where you find the fuel that generates your stories. And so, after the fun is over, I find that my dominant feeling is sympathy. I fear this may irritate you more than anything else. I wonder. Meanwhile, keep cool. Don't offer people like me the awful temptation of your Preparation H experiences, some of us will be unable to resist a very cheap shot. March, if you must, to the beat of your different drummer. Keep writing, seek the grail, follow the greater crusade, but don't ever forget that you have friends in the ghetto you so despise. And the God that took you from the printed book go with you, Ellison. Charles Sheffield. So that was a very measured response, I think, to some very overblown commentary by Harlan Ellison. It's interesting to see how being an angry nerd has a long and proud tradition. Blue Rooster, you're not wrong. Regarding the comment about Silverberg, Wikipedia mentions Silverberg had a sideline in investing. Around the time of this essay, he owned a mansion in Manhattan. Interesting. I think that was the perfect response. I think there's maybe one more in the series. If so, we'll read it, even though it is time. But I think there's just one more letter. So Ellison responds to Sheffield, and then I was unable to find any response back after this one. Hopefully, less foul. All right, Harlan Ellison. Response to Mr. Sheffield's response to his original analysis of me and my work is unnecessary. What he says changes nothing. He continues to try categorizing me as he wishes to be categorized. But if being lumped with Mr. Sheffield as a sci-fi writer means I have to write for the magazines for which he writes, at the rates he is sometimes paid, and sometimes not get paid at all, I would sooner go back to driving truck or laying brick. Fortunately, that alternative is not one I have to think about. The long struggle has freed me to a large extent. Nor will I respond to his article in Thrust number 10, his surefire method for becoming a great science fiction writer. I didn't read that one because it's rather lengthy. I spent entirely too much time on Mr. Sheffield already, though I confess it would have been far more deleterious to my soul's well-being had I just shrugged and ignored him, as so many of your readers and my friends advised. Nonetheless, a peculiar thing has happened recently regarding Mr. Sheffield and that article in Thrust number 10. Long before I'd seen the magazine, and we have the good offices of David Bischoff, who gave me a copy when he was in California, to thank for my having seen it at all, I began getting letters from your readers, people whose names I'd never even heard, suddenly began writing to me, asking me to reply to what they perceived as very fucked up advice on how to write. Their phrase, oddly enough, not mine. I received 4 letters in about a week. Each of the correspondents seemed quite exercised about Mr. Sheffield's advice and wanted me to play hired gun in shooting him down. Well, Dave gave me the magazine, and Tom Monteleone and several other people have told me that Charles Sheffield is an absolutely splendid man and a good writer. They lament this obvious rancor because they say we would like each other. That may be. I'll have to read all of Sheffield's published works, which I intend to do immediately, before I would be willing to venture even a tentative opinion, as opposed to Mr. Sheffield, who feels it okay to refer to me as a bandwagoner, a label exceedingly insulting and inappropriate. That would provide at least a workable basis on which to judge him as a writer. The splendiferousness of him as a human being is probably beyond my capacity to establish. We'll very likely never meet. But if we do, common courtesy will no doubt be the order of the day, despite my hooting in print at what I take to be impertinent and unjustified transgression into my life. And so, because of the high marks given Mr. Sheffield by people whose friendship I honor, and whose opinions I frequently share, I have opted not to go against Mr. Sheffield in his views on writing. This should not be taken as an agreement with Mr. Sheffield's thesis, which I consider absolutely weird and counterproductive to anyone seeking a career as a writer. It is merely an abstaining vote. Rather than promulgating such berserk ideas about how to be a writer, Mr. Sheffield would better serve your writer/readers if he wrote a detailed analysis of how to get payment out of such magazines as Amazing and Galaxy, 2 periodicals for which he labors in the noble vineyards of sci-fi. The former a magazine whose persistent screwing and cavalier treatment of writers has netted it a universal boycott by science fiction writers of America. The latter, a magazine whose publisher is so notorious for not paying his bills that he has personally been dragged into Manhattan small claims court by people whose work has been used and for which they have not been compensated until they scream legally, and who tells his editor not to keep bothering him about paying people, that it's none of your damn business. Mr. Sheffield's talent notwithstanding, he is a man who might, by some, be termed a scab, and by others an amateur for suffering such indignities. I would not call him either. I don't know him, though I am assured Brutus is an honorable man. So are we all honorable men. I will say merely this. Mr. Sheffield's epistle to the Thessalonians advising how to become a great science fiction writer is as French fried a piece of codswallop as I've read lately, and should be ignored on pain of having one's muse sicken and drop into pleurisy and croak. P.S. A really unworthy thought occurs to me. I voice it merely to scotch whatever such insinuations might be made by your readers who misguidedly thinking they were leaping to my aid would bum rap Mr. Sheffield on this point. To wit, in the past, a number of fans with aspirations of notoriety, either in fandom or as professionals, have picked silly fights with me, knowing my lack of restraint, and have sought to build their own reputations using me and what little I've managed to accomplish as sort of a footstool to gain prominence. It's never worked, because in the final analysis, it's the amount of individual talent the attacker possessed that weighed most heavily in the final judgment. One of Thrust's readers, who wanted me to take on Sheffield, made the suggestion that this was his way of getting himself known. I utterly reject the idea. Despite my disagreement with what Mr. Sheffield has said about me, and disagree most decidedly with the content of his article on becoming a great science fiction writer, it is clear that that man has the ability to write, and I perceive in his statements a sense of personal ethic. These are clear and negate any consideration of his using me as a coattail. One final point, addressed to Doug Pratt, in your response to Mike Glickson's letter in number 10, you say that my departure from science fiction would be a loss to the field, apart from the fact that I don't consider what I write to be science fiction, nor does Fred Pohl, nor does Frank Herbert, nor do legions of other SF writers and critics. I am not leaving science fiction. I am simply leaving the bloody label. What I've always written is what I'll continue to write. Look at my new book, Strange Wine. Harper and Row will publish it on July 5th. Look at it. I urge you, just look at it. Is it any less writing in the genre of the fantastic than other books of mine? It just ain't labeled or packaged as sci-fi. I leave only an arbitrary ghettoizing categorization, not the work that I've done for the last 25 years. So please try to eschew the rah-rah and look at the realities. Stop thinking of science fiction as a monolithic structure and recognize it as an enormously seductive inner circle of the greater literary genre called fantasy. And perceive many of us who resist the labeling as elements of the diaspora, moving on and out, but taking with us the sensibility of the idiom in which we've matured. Surely you will see that is no crime. To want to be as good as one can be, to fight against being pigeonholed and thus compelled to rewrite the same stories and themes over and over again. Sorry, I just saw some of the chat. Means I have to write for the magazines for which he writes in this magazine, which Sheffield also writes for. Indeed, actually, Sheffield, I don't know. I didn't really ever quite figure it out. He's a contributing editor. Oh, blurry. So Charles Sheffield was actually a contributing editor of this magazine. So he appears in it quite a few times, including, as was mentioned in issue number 10, where there is something that is much too long for me to read at this point because we're out of time. We're past time. The easiest way to become a great science fiction writer. On page 13, Sheffield writes about how to become a science fiction writer. And apparently Ellison does not agree. Whatever. You're free to find a copy of the issue number 10, spring 1978 of Thrust magazine if you want to find this article. You can also contact our archives if you want to read it, because we have it. This man has so much free time. He literally began his long response with, "No response necessary. Take your own advice, dude. Shut up." Exactly. Strange Wine, a collection of previously published stories, so not technically what he was writing right now anyway. In fact, you just looked it up. The SFWA boycott of Amazing ended just a couple months after this. No idea if Amazing got better at paying or if SFWA just got tired of having a boycott. Few people were following anyway. Thank you for the time check, Hannah. And Ellison, not knowing who Sheffield was, not a big deal. Apparently fans tried to claim that Sheffield only was arguing with Ellison to raise his own profile and ride Ellison's coattails. Sheffield served as the president of the Science Fiction Writers of America. I don't know if it was during the time that these letters were going back and forth, but Sheffield did not need help raising his profile, or he didn't need to write or to ride anybody else's coattails. He was published. He had his own readership. He, yeah. So, and credit to Ellison, he, in his discussion, said that he dismisses any claims that Sheffield was trying to ride his coattails, because just from reading the letters and talking to people he trusts, he believes Sheffield is a good writer and that he's not in it to try and raise his profile. So that was at least a nod at the end. Those are the letters. Those are the ones, that's the argument, that's all of it. I think it was interesting. What did you all think? Ellison certainly had a lot of sound and fury, signifying nothing, as observed by Sheffield. And I kind of understand that he didn't want to be, like, categorized into a specific genre when he felt like his work was broader than the genre. I sort of get that. He needs to hear himself talk. I'm aware of a modern author who is often talked about in the context of a specific genre that they feel does not apply to them. That being Nnedi Okorafor, who is often described as writing Afrofuturism, and she vehemently disagrees with categorizing her works as Afrofuturism. I will not try to explain her thinking myself, but other than to say that she writes science fiction set in Africa. she doesn't see her work as fitting in that label, and there's a very particular reason why she doesn't think that it fits in that label. I didn't review beforehand, so I would be insufficient to articulate it. I will point you to her social media or her commentaries on Afrofuturism for her explanations of why she doesn't feel that her works belong in that category. But it's sort of the same thing, where she doesn't think that her stuff belongs there, and Ellison did not think that his stuff belonged in the science fiction category. I think Nnedi Okorafor is a bit more graceful in making her arguments, though. Genres are just shortcuts for people to find the things that they like. Yeah. So I thought that this was an interesting thing. I will, at some point, want to come back and actually look at a piece of fiction written by Charles Sheffield, just so that I can actually share Charles Sheffield with people who might not have heard of him before, because I do quite like a number of the novels that he wrote. But when I discovered this, I was like, no, this is the episode. I have to look at this exchange between the two authors, arguing about categorizing Ellison's work as science fiction versus, I don't know what he wanted to be categorized as. I don't think that ever really came through, but he didn't want to be called sci-fi. I'm just going to say this dude would be popular on Twitter. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly when Twitter started. He might have been at some point on there, because he lived until 2018, and I'm pretty sure Twitter was around then. I don't know. Also reminding you that you've wanted to read more of Sheffield's Erasmus Darwin stories. I have not read any of those yet. I need to. He did a whole series of historical sci-fi stories starring Charles Darwin's grandfather. Amazing. Yeah, I've read the Heritage Universe ones and the Cold as Ice trilogy, and then I just finished Starfire, which I realize is the second book, and I missed the first book. So now I have to go back and read one about Supernova of Alpha Centauri. It's fun. Twitter's from 2006. Thank you. I had forgotten. Anyway, I do need to wrap this up. Next week, we'll be back to the USS Dakota Engineers Journal. So hopefully I will see some of you then. Let me go ahead and figure out where we're going to raid. All right, I see Stephen Joyce. I see... Oh! We're definitely... I think I know where we're going. Because we can. Y'all, we're gonna head on over to paleontologizing for a dinosaur fossil tour. Examining the claws, teeth, and bones inside the Utah raptor megablock. I can't see the rest of the title, but with Utah's state paleontologist Jim Kirkland. That's where we're gonna head over to paleontologizing. Join me to head over there. Paleontologizing is a wonderful educational stream. I do highly recommend that you ride on over there with the raid and say hello when we get there. And let me just set this up. Sorry, the raid window, it still throws me now. It looks just weird now. All right. So we'll be popping on over to Paleontologizing. I will be live next for another archives stream. Coming up next week on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope that I will see you all again soon. Until I do, keep exploring history, everyone.